Welcome to the show. This is Brandon Wen, and you're listening to the Understanding Consumer Neuroscience podcast, brought to you by the folks at Cloud Army. In this episode, Richard talks to Dominic King, Senior Principal at Accenture Research, about his work on the World Economic Forum Profit versus Sustainability report and the importance of neuroscience research that uncovered opportunities for companies to be more sustainable.
Hi, this is Richard Campbell. Thanks for listening to Understanding Consumer Neuroscience. Today, my guest is Dominic King, who's the Senior Principal at Accenture Research, focused on the sustainability and responsible business practice. Dominic, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Richard. Good to be here.
And so you're one of the authors of this World Economic Forum report. Like, I see your name front and center on it. Although, I mean, it's interesting to me. I always think of Accenture as the group that goes in and writes security profiles and technology and those kinds of things. Sustainability wasn't the first thing I thought about. How did you end up here? Like, that seems like an interesting role.
Well, I think, to be honest, every business needs to be aware of sustainability right now. Accenture is a consultant first and foremost. Yeah, tech consultant. Mm-hmm. Really, we're talking about trying to help our clients grow. And I think sustainability is one of the ways in which businesses today it's an area they need to be aware of, because it's an area which can offer a huge amount to them in terms of competitive advantage, in terms of knowing their customers better, in terms of better use of materials, in terms of employee engagement, all those areas,
right?
All those different areas are what I would, at Accenture, we would term and define sustainability as being all of those things. It's all the non-financial considerations that a company has. And if a company is not aware of those and not clued into them and not thinking about them and not thinking about how to improve them, is going to struggle.
And I guess the term sustainability has changed so much because you think there's no profitability in not being in business. So you want to sustain your business. And one of the ways you do that is by sustaining your customers as well. Like, everything should be sustainable. But how is the word sustainable changed in this context? Is it specifically around environmental concerns?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I think it's been hijacked, to be honest. It's the word sustainability for me means long-term viable. Now, if you think about an ecosystem,
right,
think about the Amazon rainforest. People say, we're killing that. What does it mean? It means for the Amazon rainforest to be used sustainably, it needs to be around viably in 20 years' time. And that means for all different types of groups. That means in terms of the biodiversity that dwells there. It means in terms of the indigenous peoples who live there. It means in terms of the people who live in and around it, and maybe use it for some sustainable logging or some sustainable farming. And I think in the same way for a business, sustainability for me is long-term financial.
Right. You can't just focus on quarterly returns.
No, 100%. No, 100% not. Quarterly returns are important to investors. Mm-hmm. Get that. But if you're not thinking about the longevity of your business, then what are you doing there? There's loads of businesses which have gone out of business because they haven't thought about the long term. And I think for me that's what sustainability is. And it so happens that right now thinking about some of those other stakeholders, your employees, your customers, your communities, your suppliers, all that is important to the long term viability of your business. And yes, environmental concerns are important. That's because your stakeholders care about them.
Right.
And also because those environmental concerns will come back to bite you in terms of your supply chain, your premises, lots of different things that companies are dealing with now with, weather events, that can come back to bite different companies. So it's important companies are aware of this stuff
and incorporate it in. I mean, and I think most companies are aware, and your report basically reflects that. It's like the vast majority of leadership is like, oh yes, this is important. But now you get into this sort of greenwashing problem where it's like, I'm saying it's important, but what am I doing about it?
No, 100%. And imagine you're the boss of a big tech company when employees ask them to cancel a lucrative government contract. We could probably think of an example there.
Easily.
Or the boss of a big mining company trying to work out what to do with its most profitable but yet most polluting business line.
Right.
Or you're the head of a big consumer products company and you're thinking, I want to switch to a more sustainable supplier of palm oil, but it's going to cost me 25% more. How do companies respond in those situations? Because on the face of it, you've got profitability in direct conflict with sustainability there. And as you say, I think a lot of companies know the moral case, I think, is pretty clear.
Mm-hmm.
The problem companies have is the business case.
Yeah, and I wonder if it is a direct conflict, because isn't there a whole campaign I can make around getting a better source of palm oil? Like, this seems like, yeah, I'm going to raise the price, but I'm also going to make a better product that my customer is willing to pay more for.
No, absolutely. And I think there's definitely an argument there for green products and companies launching green products. But at the end of the day, whatever consumers might say about their desire for greener, more sustainable products,
right?
At the end of the day, it's price, quality, convenience, which matter to them. Those are their tier one priorities. I say there, I mean, they are tier one priorities when we're buying it.
Right. We are consumers also.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We sometimes forget that, them and us. But no, we make those decisions. Will people pay more for a sustainable product? On surveys, they say they will.
Right.
Comes to the supermarket, the grocery store, they don't. The companies know this. They have to hit those three things first.
The right way. And certainly this has been an ongoing conversation on this show, has been that same schism you have in leadership about what we say we care about and what we do. The same thing happens with our consumers, and why we use neuroscience to actually get past what you said on the survey versus your actual actions and your emotional actions when we bake a product that is more sustainable, but perhaps costs more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing with leadership is we know that they are, as I say, convinced by let's call it the moral case, for want of a better terminology, but they're convinced that sustainability is a good thing to be thinking about. What they're not convinced about is that it's a tier one priority. And we've done a bunch of research looking at and proving that it's not a tier one priority. When you force execs to choose between different priorities, sustainability comes out tier two. And I think what we wanted to do next with this research is sort of say, why? What sits behind that the perceived trade-off between profitability and sustainability? There's a narrative around sustainable business that it's more complex, unreliable, less practical. Is that narrative true?
Yeah.
And can we get closer to what's really going on? Because without knowing what the real blockers are to sustainable business, not what people report, but actually what the blockers are when push comes to shove and people have to make business decisions, without knowing what the genuine barriers are, we're going to struggle to make any progress.
Interesting. So you did these studies to actually drill into that problem. What'd you find?
So we found, interestingly, that yes, there's this overarching narrative around sustainability being very challenging. And I don't think what we found disproved that. But business is challenging and change is challenging. And what we're asking companies to do by becoming more sustainable is fundamental organizational changes, moving away from that decades-long focus on short-term profitability towards longer-term thinking, the types of things we've been discussing about long-term financial viability. And that's hard. But what we found in this study, by looking at what survey data said and looking at what people told us, we identified these perceived barriers. What we then did is that using implicit association testing, we went a level deeper and said, are those barriers, is that the truth?
Is that the convenient answer? Yeah.
Yeah. Is there social desirability in that response? Is that what they're telling us to almost excuse themselves from inaction? They say, sorry, sustainable business is too hard. It's too complex. It's too expensive. We don't know if it's going to work. So we went that level deeper with the implicit association testing, and we tested these 5 headwinds, as we call them, the things I've described. And what we found surprised us, because we expected all those 5 headwinds to be barriers. We expected them all to be headwinds, all stopping businesses from becoming more sustainable. We expected them to be of different strengths, sure, but we expected them all to be headwinds. What we actually found is that 2 of them work the other way. So 2 of them are tailwinds. So cost and complexity are actually pushing businesses towards becoming more sustainable. What does that mean? It means that business as usual is becoming more costly, more complex.
Right.
There are challenges that remain with becoming, a more sustainable business, especially the ones we found were speed and reliability. So people don't know how fast some of this stuff will scale or whether it will ever scale at all. And those are challenges which do need to be resolved. Those are challenges to mitigate. But cost and complexity, businesses can lean into those.
Right. And those are easy ones to challenge. There's no leader that's going to be in trouble because they went after cost and complexity.
No, exactly. And you think about a good example is the automotive industry, right? Mm-hmm. Think about making money from the internal combustion engine now.
Yes.
How hard is that? Internal combustion engine, business as usual. Electric vehicles,
totally,
we would say, are more sustainable, right?
And I would argue after 120 years of building the internal combustion engine, it's a pretty refined machine, and you're just trying to shave percentage points of improvement now. Mm-hmm. Compared to EVs are relatively young, lots of improvement to be had.
Absolutely. And then, you're thinking about the way regulation is going. Mm-hmm. You think about the way consumer demand's going. You think about, the environmental movement. All those things are working against the, internal combustion engine and pushing companies towards EVs. And the companies which didn't get into EVs quickly at the start are now, paddling hard.
Right. Racing to catch up. So a great example of you are limiting your sustainability by not moving and tackling this change. And certainly, one of the things they say about pure EVs is they're a lot less complex machines. So you've made a more reliable, simpler machine that the customer seems to like.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I mean, there are trade-offs under trade-offs, right? There are trade-offs with EVs in terms of, where are you getting the metals and the minerals and the bits and pieces? How easy are they to recycle? Can you shift the employees working on the internal combustion engine to EVs? What about, the upkeep of those cars? Do they need as much maintenance? All that sort of thing. All those things have got to be factored into this change. But I think on the surface of it, what we by going this level deeper, what we were able to find, really surprised us. And it's a type of thing when you put it in front of a business leader, as we have done, you see them all going, okay, no, I buy that.
Right.
I can see that in my own industry.
Well, even going back to your original scenario, I'm going to change my palm oil supplier. Changing a supplier is hard. Full stop. Doesn't matter what the difference in the supplier is. All of these changes are hard. So the idea that you're going to tackle complexity, maybe simplify your supply chain, and in that process, pick more sustainable practices doesn't necessarily make it any more harder than the change you're already going to do.
No, exactly right. And I think there's as human beings, we are programmed to avoid change, right? Change on the savannah meant you were probably going to end up dead.
Sure.
Because, there was no food here, or there was a saber-toothed tiger there, whatever.
Right.
That's deep programmed within us. And we don't like change, on the whole. And the idea of changing this, some of these, they're so complex, these businesses.
Yeah.
Some of the big ones. And exactly the point about supply chains is really interesting. We saw that during COVID, how the complexity of supply chains really challenged businesses. So any of this change is hard. And that's why we do this work, essentially. We're trying to find and develop business models, show companies how to develop their own business models to move past this inertia of we're going to maintain the status quo. We're going to do things the way they've already been done, tiny, incremental change. What we're saying is actually, I'm not saying you have to change tomorrow.
No.
But actually, you probably need to change today, but you don't need to change the whole thing by tomorrow.
Well, and I appreciate that part of the study you did here was to show here's an area you can focus that does have obvious reward, is a recognized area that no matter what you're doing can be improved. Going after complexity in business is a good thing to do. But just adding that value statement of, and we're going to do it sustainably, doesn't make it any worse. So you do achieve this goal that our leaders have been talking about of want a more sustainable practice, whether that's environmental, culture, and so forth. But then also, these were always good changes. These will provide returns. I think it's a great statement about neuroscience to unravel that problem and show, hey, you had all of these things, but when you study them better, there's a few ones that pop out that you'll get good returns from, and it's a great place to start.
No, if we'd done the study in a, let's call it a traditional way.
Sure.
We'd done it, say, by doing some interviews and doing a survey, we would have ended up with those 5 barriers, and we would have said, we'd have had some statistics, 75% of business leaders say cost is a challenge for moving to sustainable business.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's park the fact that what does that really mean, that 75%? What do you do with that? But then there's the second order thing is, do you believe that? And the third thing is, well, do you believe it? But how close is that to the truth?
Mm-hmm.
And what we got with the, using neuroscience just got us to exactly as you said, a level deeper, a level closer to the truth. And it got us to insights which surprised us. It's good being surprised. We go in with hypotheses into a lot of these, into all these research projects. And normally you get to a point where your hypothesis is proved. In this case, we disproved a few hypotheses, which is good. But as researchers, that's what we should be doing. It's not, research to tell a pre-existing story. It should be the research comes first and the story comes second. And I'll be honest with you, on this research, we've had to flip it around in a couple of places. We didn't get the results we expected.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because we changed the method. And that's because of working with Cloud Army and doing the neuroscience, it got us to somewhere unexpected. And as I say, I think it got us to somewhere which is a lot closer to the truth.
And only closer. There is no perfect truth on any of this, least of all in the aggregate too. Every industry is different. Every company is different to some degree, but yeah.
Absolutely. In this particular study, we didn't have the space in the study to look at the industry level, but you could imagine different industries, different sizes of company, different geographies, all of that playing a massive role into, each of those 5 barriers that we tested. And no doubt there'll be higher and lower in different places, different types of businesses, depending on what they're doing. But absolutely the point about just being closer to somewhere which starts a more honest conversation, I think, is key.
We brushed briefly against the cultural side of employees being uncomfortable with a particular customer, this idea of selecting down that customer. I don't know that you had the time to do the additional research, but I'd be fascinated in that sort of long-term view of when we chose culture over a particular customer, that we supported our people, like how did that change our people? Like, I wonder, I think that'd be a little more challenging to measure, but certainly I've worked with companies over the years where when they picked culture first, they got more of those folks and things got stronger. They move faster. Like it's one thing to say, hey, I'll simplify my supply chain, manage some complexity, and we get some returns on that, and it's sustainable. The picking people first part, that's got to be a challenging thing to swallow.
Yeah, and I think absolutely comes up against the short-term, long-term thing again. I think in the short term, go after customers and go after their wallets.
Mm-hmm.
Get them to spend more in your store today. What about thinking, exactly as you said, thinking more about the culture, thinking more about customer engagement and boosting customer loyalty, so that they might spend a little bit less in your store today, but they're going to spend tomorrow and the day after tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. There are great examples of, there's only a few, but there are some good examples of, especially big clothing manufacturer I can think of, which really encourages its customers not to buy its garments. And you think it's so goes against the grain of everything we know about.
Very counterintuitive.
Right, very counterintuitive, great marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, their fan base, you could call it fan because they're more than customers. And I think that their fan base is so strong that the business itself remains a leader in its particular market.
It's amazing. It is amazing when you get those things right and you see these. And again, it's easy for us to point and go, that's a unicorn. That's a one-off. Not that we could all be like that to some degree, but I think we could. I'm going to encourage folks to read the report. Like, it is encouraging to say there's a way to take this problem apart, but I'm also appreciative that you got to a deeper level of the truth. There is no whole truth around this by doing some studies and really digging into it. As is typical of most research, immediately I see more research that could be done.
Oh yeah, and when we'd love to, and I think where after looking at the headwinds, the next question for us really was, well, what do companies do with that? How do
Right.
you change? How do you drive change? How do you move along that? People overuse the term journey, but it is a journey from going from a, business as usual to becoming a more sustainable business. So how do you facilitate that change? And I think for us, there were three levers that stood out. One is around purpose. Again, purpose is an overused term,
Right.
but what we really mean is everyone bought into what you're trying to do? And does your purpose, I don't mean that the little statement on the About Us section on the corporate website, I mean what the whole organization is trying to do, does that allow people in that organization to pursue sustainability? So you think about a big car manufacturer moving from being a car manufacturer to being a mobility services provider. And what does that offer? Now, it might sound like, it's cosmetic change, but actually, if you think about what it allows people in the business to do, it allows them to go after different types of vehicles, leasing, digitizing, stuff within the vehicle when people are moving.
Sure.
It's a big change, on what we call pervasive purpose.
Right. There was a couple of other aspects of that. I'm wondering if you're lining up with Daniel Pink's here, mastery, autonomy, purpose.
I mean, the second one's around extended horizons, which is something we've talked about before, but it's moving out away from short-termism.
Right.
So, how are you allowing a new sustainable initiative? How are you allowing it to upscale, to grow, to build?
Just that mindset that I don't have to, that this new project doesn't have to deliver this quarter, that it might actually take a year to deliver value.
No, exactly. And, there's two aspects to it. One is what we've talked about just general long-term thinking on the business. Goes back to what we were just saying about our, the customer, but let's think about it in the employee as well. Do we sweat this employee as hard as we can so they deliver results for us over the next 3 months?
Yeah.
Or alternative, do we engage with this employee, give them the type of environment that they want, and make them a great employee for us over the next 3 to 5 years? You tell me which is the better route. It seems obvious.
I'm pretty sure this is a grim fairy tale involving a golden goose, right? Like these are pretty known things, but
you'd think. But I guess when delve into sort of the diseconomies of scale and treating how do you treat everyone in a massive organization as individuals, or all your customers as individuals? That's that's the goal anyway. But that second one, we call it extended horizons, and that's about long-term thinking, both in terms of business and then in terms of new sustainable initiatives. Are you allowing them the time to scale? Maybe previously, companies often demand a sort of an internal rate of return.
Right.
Typically, that's over 3 years. What about if you extended that to 5 years, 6 years, to allow that new initiative time to scale up?
Yeah, rather than killing it just as it was going to turn the corner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm not indefinitely, but thinking about this is just longer term thinking.
Yeah. And the third?
And then the third one is around thinking beyond financial metrics. We've touched on this before, but for many years, and still now, the leading metric of a company is its, exactly as you said, quarterly returns. You see that in analyst statements. You see it in a way in which any company is judged. And it's very important for companies to make profits. Profits are good. Profits allow a company to pay its employees more. They allow it to help their suppliers grow. It allows it to offer new products and services to customers. It allows them to invest in community initiatives. So profits are important, but are profits the be all and end all? We'd say no. You've got to think a little bit more broadly. You've got to think about some non-financial indicators in there as well. Why? Because those non-financial indicators directly impact on your long-term financial viability. And you can think about that across multiple different stakeholders. You can think about it across biodiversity, right? There's so much of business is dependent on biodiversity.
This reminds me of the economic J curve too, that as long, you get caught on that low side of that J, and so you can only be so successful, and you have to go down the curve to go up the higher side. You've got to give room to take some lumps and to deal with the inertia to actually break free and achieve the potential.
Yeah.
And you see that curve occur over and over and over again.
It's a really good way of thinking about it, because you can think of each of those three levers on that J curve. You can think about the purpose being that end goal. You can think about the long-term thinking, getting over that trough. And then you can think about the 360 value, that the way in which you actually go up the curve, because you're thinking about things which are not necessarily important today,
right,
but will be important tomorrow. You're thinking not just about, as I said, getting money out of your customer's pocket today. You're thinking about, how do I deliver value in the jargon? But really what you're saying is
sustain that relation long term.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Dominic, really a fun conversation. It's great to see, just digging into this research and not just throwing up our hands or even just knuckling down and doing hard things that we didn't need to do hard. Like, there's easier ways to do this. I realize, looking at the 5, where the headwinds still remain the unreliability and the speed, a lot of those tend to get resolved when you deal with the costs and the complexity. Like, all of this seems to fit together fairly well. Once you organize that way, it seems more obvious. But until you do the research, it never is.
No, exactly. And that's why I think what we did here was genuine white space stuff. I think it's new. I think it's differentiated. There's a lot of material out there which says there's a trade-off.
Right.
This is how you resolve it. I think a lot of stuff I've seen is limited in scope to what people say the issues are,
right,
as opposed to what the actual issues are. And I think by using neuroscience, that's what you get a lot closer to. You get under the skin of this really, really complex business issue. It's an issue which loads of our clients are wrestling with right now.
Yeah.
They want to engage in sustainability. They talk a great game, but they're not necessarily walking the talk.
Yeah. And not with any negative intent, just like it's hard to know what to do next. And I'm sure they've got plenty of false starts. So doing that deeper level of research to say, these are the areas we can make a difference, that begin the move along that curve, get us moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we were hoping to do with this research, was change the narrative. The narrative is, it's costly, it's complex, it's unreliable, it's impractical, it's slow. And I think, at least partially, we've said, hold your horses. It's not all of those things.
Right.
Sticking to business as usual is more costly.
Yes. And ultimately less sustainable.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah. Dominic, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure. Thank you, Richard.
And we'll talk to you next time on Understanding Consumer Neuroscience.